Well, welcome everyone to the third installment of the Senior Leadership Insights series. My name is Melissa Bostrom, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development. Today's conversation is sponsored by the Graduate School in partnership with the Department of Biomedical Engineering. The series was created and developed by a group of volunteers from the Graduate Board of Visitors, some of whom I know hope to join us today for the conversation. To make the most of our focused time together, I'll address a few logistics up front. We'll begin the conversation with the 6 key questions we ask all our featured senior leaders. And then we'll move on to questions from the audience. You're welcome to pose your questions in the chat during the conversation, or if you'd like to speak, you can use the raise hand option that should be accessible through the reactions button in the lower right corner of your Zoom window. I'll be helping to moderate the questions. I do want to let you know that this session is being recorded, so if you prefer not to appear in the recording, please keep your video muted and just share your questions in the chat. So with those details out of the way, I'd like now to introduce Dr. Joel Collier, Theodore Kennedy Professor of Biomedical Engineering and Director of Graduate Studies for the PhD program in Biomedical Engineering, who will be interviewing our special guest, Dr. Adam Sharkawy. Professor Collier.
Thanks, Melissa. So our guest today, Dr. Adam Sharkawy, is co-founder and managing partner at Material Impact, a fund that seeks out transformative materials technologies and builds them into enduring companies that solve real-world problems. An accomplished healthcare and life sciences executive, Adam brings his track record of building and leading material-based centers of innovation within large companies and experience on both sides of acquisition transactions to the Material Impact team. His worldwide leadership spans US, international, and emerging markets. His diverse background spans technologies like devices, bioactives, biologics, therapy spaces such as interventional, cardiovascular, surgery, orthopedics, and business environments like VC-funded startups and Fortune 500 companies. Prior to Material Impact, Adam was Senior VP of the Medicines Company and Head of Surgery and Perioperative Care Global BU, where he led the $170 million acquisition of Tenaxis Medical and the integration of 3 other acquired companies in deals totaling more than $1 billion. Before that, he helped establish Smith & Nephew's emerging market divisions in Dubai. Other experiences include starting the Advanced Healing Technologies and Biomaterials franchise within Smith & Nephew's endoscopy division and leading the R&D organization there. Adam received his PhD from Duke and his master's from Texas A&M and his BS in mechanical engineering from the American University in Cairo. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Sharkawy back to Duke virtually for today's conversation. And so, Adam, I have a series of questions, and we can there's 6 of them that we can sort of go through. As folks have questions that come up, please feel free to raise your hand or enter them into the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on those. The first one's a pretty open-ended one, and that's just tell us about your background. What was your path to your current role that you're in right now?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. It's really a pleasure and honor to be talking to all of you. And albeit virtual, I do look forward to getting back to Duke campus and engaging with students directly, which is my favorite thing to do, honestly. So looking forward to that. But I think that the relevant maybe parts of my background that may paint kind of the picture of my journey here, which I think could be relevant to a lot of students listening in, is that I started my career as an entrepreneur, and it was in the Silicon Valley, and it was at a time when really I was just trying to sharpen my engineering chops. And it was a little bit daunting being in the Silicon Valley at that time. It was right at the tail end of a lot of high tech startups that were really taking shape and making transformations in the entire areas around microelectronics and computing technology. And I felt like here I am, this young, inexperienced engineer who is trying to, really has a passion for innovation, trying to operate within this environment. And I was very fortunate really to have had a career during kind of I would call it my first half of my career, which would really focus around being an entrepreneur. So I was a bit of a serial entrepreneur where I was involved in about 4 or 5 startups. And the algorithm that I had, and this will become maybe relevant later, was completely serendipitous, by the way. But you know, when I look back at it now, I wouldn't change a thing. And that is that I had the good fortune of having each of my startups that I was involved in be acquired. But after every acquisition, I'd go back to school and do another degree. And why that was really interesting for me was that every time I did a degree, I really had a very clear, objective-oriented pathway towards that research in that degree. So it was very guided. I knew exactly what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it, and I had a plan going in, which again may become relevant later. So I did that for a series of about maybe 15 years almost. And most of the technologies I was involved in were in the interventional cardiology space. I was got the pleasure of working on the very first balloon catheter technology when there was no alternative to bypass open chest surgery, and that whole work really created an entire field that is now called interventional cardiology. Did a lot of work in minimally invasive cardiac surgery, in renal and neuro. But anyway, in each of those had my companies acquired by larger companies like Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Mallinckrodt, Eli Lilly, and so forth. Then I decided, when I went to Duke, that was kind of the third of those cycles, and I did my PhD at Duke. I went back and did a few more startups, a few more acquisitions under my belt. Then I jumped the fence to the other side and did the exact opposite of what I was doing, to try to get a 360 view. And that is, I always joke and say that I joined the dark side of corporate leadership. And there I did the opposite. I started running really large scale businesses and doing a lot of acquisitions. Instead of being acquired, I was acquiring a lot of other companies. Did that for another, I would say 13 to 14 years, and was a member of the leadership teams of Abbott, Guidant, Smith & Nephew Medicines Company, and so forth. And it was through that lens that I really started to appreciate kind of a 360 view around how to create enterprise, enterprise value through innovation. And so towards that later stage of my career, when I was in kind of the large corporate world, the entrepreneur was still very, very much, the bane of my existence. And so I was always trying to debunk the myth that a large corporate environment can't be innovative, despite a lot of the challenges that are inertial almost. So when I got the bug to go back to the entrepreneurial world, instead of starting another company, I thought, well, it'd be a lot better to leverage my experiences to entrepreneurs who are younger and brighter than me, work on, trying to change the world through their transformative technologies. And that's when a good friend of mine, who's also very affiliated with Duke, is on the board of trustees, Carmichael Roberts. That's when he and I basically started this venture fund called Material Impact. So that's a little bit about my background, the journey I took, and very much defines, I think, further conversations that we'll have today about the role of doctoral research in, creating different career paths.
Great. Are there any questions from the audience that would like to follow on with that? We have, I have a series of questions, but if there's something that came up that resonated that you'd like to probe further on, glad to do that right now. Pause for a moment and see if there's anyone who has a question. If not, the next question I have in my series follows a little bit on what you were just saying, Adam, and that's, what does a typical PhD level hire, what does their typical day look like in your organization right now? Or is there such a thing as a typical? I imagine there are many possible typical days.
Yeah, no, I think, we may be a little bit different than a traditional venture firm. We're not financiers. We are all scientifically and technically trained. Every member of our team, with the exception of a very traditional role like our CFO. But all of the entire investment team are, comprise very technically trained, scientifically trained members, many of which are indeed PhDs. And also, we're all operators. So we've all run businesses. We've all been in entrepreneurial settings. And I think that those are really important to point out because many other venture firms could comprise, a more traditional route through investment banking and through some sort of, financially related disciplines. We're all very much of the kind of PhD ilk. So I think when we talk about what we do on a day-to-day basis, which is really take a step back and try to figure out what are the world's largest problems. And I call them kind of Maslowian needs, right? The needs of the lowest base of Maslow's triangle. Things that pertain to water scarcity and the food supply chain and certain aspects of underserved health and so forth. We try to define those problems, and just like you would in a typical research project, right? Mm. And then we go after interesting technologies, and we use that as kind of our compass to guide the solutions of interesting technologies that we feel are indeed, most of which actually stem from academic institutions. Matter of fact, I would say that probably 80 to 90% of our companies, our portfolio companies, are actually spin outs from universities. Wow. So that's another link to kind of PhD world, right? And then we partner with entrepreneurs who are very much again of our ilk to help transform that technology into a full-scale business that can really address that need in a commercial setting. So at the end of the day, we rely very heavily on our technical training, and not just not again. We'll maybe get into this later. Not because of the specific domain expertise of the technical training, but more on our thought process and our approach to solving problems.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. How does having a PhD help, or how did pursuing your PhD allow you to develop that kind of thought process skill set? And is there a way, could you give an example maybe of something that your PhD allows you to do now?
Sure. So I say twofold. The first is something that I'm sure that has been mentioned many times before and will be mentioned many times after, and that is that doing a PhD is so much more than some specialized training in a particular discipline of research, right? And it's really about a way of thinking critically and rigorously. Mm-hmm. Starting with how do you frame any thought process first with the underlying assumptions, right, upon which any further work is to be based. And then secondly, developing and utilizing tools at your disposal, right, to be able to leverage data and evidence to fill in voids in that data and evidence with well thought out, plan of interrogation. I'll call it an interrogation plan because it doesn't have to be, technical research, right? It just has to be a journey to try to fill in those voids. The third, how do you analyze that data? And especially in a world like today where we are completely inundated with data streams to our left and right. And then finally, how to ensure the conclusion, and this is probably the most important part, how to ensure that the conclusions that we draw go back and are viewed from the framework of the initial assumptions that we made, so that we know what the limitations of that conclusion is. That is the most powerful aspect of, I think, a PhD, and then one in which it becomes second, nature. You no longer have to think about it. So, that's, I would say, that the first part. The second part, in terms of how does a PhD help, our work, there's a certain aspect that I didn't come to appreciate until maybe a year ago or 2 years ago. And that is, when you're spending, 30 minutes a pop, 45 minutes reviewing, let's say, a company's pitch. And I'll give you an example. In my case, I may see 40 to 50, pitches of technologies trying to raise money a week. So it's a pretty high volume.
Yeah.
When you have that kind of volume, it's really important to try to separate, the wheat from the chaff. And so for me, what I didn't appreciate is that just having a technical background that is fairly robust, I don't even think about it. Whether it's electrical in nature or mechanical in nature or chemical in nature, it doesn't matter. I think I can get to the underlying kernel quickly and know what to ask quickly to try to vet the technology. And so those are I would say, the two. It's not about, again, the specific discipline of your research. It's about those two things that are so broad and so powerful that they help almost anything that you do, even outside of technology.
What do you think our current PhD students can do to develop those two skills today? During their program, what can they do that, a PhD is sort of geared to work on both those, but what can they do every day to really stretch that muscle? As far as evaluating, say the second thing you talked about, which was evaluating really disparate ideas as they come across your table.
Yeah, one thing that I would always encourage people to do is, to the point of your last question, Joel, is that independent of, again, the specific interests of one's own individual research, is to embrace comfortably the entire, domain of scientific thinking and engineering. And I think it's equally important. You never know where life will take you. So it's important to feel comfortable with, all aspects of engineering. And engineering is fantastic because, I think we're all preaching to each other's choir here, being a lot of engineers in the room. But, it's really that applied scientific thinking towards real world problems. And so really understanding the basics of physics and the basics of chemistry and now biology being a very hard science in and of itself, I would embrace that no matter what specific discipline is really you. Go broader than that. And I would encourage all of the students here to really round out their overarching engineering knowledge. That gets to the second point of your question. There is, though, something I would be remiss not to mention about one of the things that I learned myself that I thought was, again, seminal in my own journey, especially at Duke. And that is, and Melissa, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I'll have to, if I have, forgive me for repeating it. But Joel, when I first came to Duke, I think my first day, I was in some, kind of a graduate student orientation lunch type of thing. And
yeah, we're about to ramp up for that in about a month.
Okay, all right, great. So I think I was like, there's a lot of BME students, and we were all, together and having lunch and this and that, and I was trying to, get everybody's name and try to, mentally. And there was this one guy who they kept on referring to as the king, and I would, the king and the king and the king and the king. So I, the guy's real name was Henry. So I went up to Henry at the end of the lunch and said, Henry, why are they calling you the king? Did you have some kind of royalty in your family, or some kind of lineage that I don't know about? And he said, oh, no, they call me that because I've been here for 10 years. And Joel, that was by far and away my biggest motivator to get in and out of Duke in 3.5 years, right? I was like, okay. So that was inspirational for me. But I'll tell you, more importantly, why I felt comfortable doing so wasn't because I had the will. No, it was because I had come through 2 or 3 rounds of going from industry to academia, back to industry to academia, and I went into my research with a very clear, objective-oriented focus.
Yeah.
And so one thing I would just encourage everyone to do is that if you do that, you will actually spare yourself the time to leverage into other areas as well, but it's all being done with a sense of purpose as opposed to just meandering through Brownian motion, right?
Yeah. I did one round of that, only one round myself. I worked a little bit before I went back to graduate school, and I found a lot of value in that as well. Like you say, having having more focused purpose, I think, understanding really clearly what I wanted to get out of graduate school, and some degree of time efficiency as well. That's not the kind of king I think anyone wants to be the king of. And the grad school and we've done, I think we've made strides in making sure that those types of stories are few and far between as far as a really extended stay.
If I can jump in a moment, we did have a question in the chat from Dennis Gilmore. And the question was, Adam, how would you advise PhDs in science and engineering to gain a better understanding of key business principles and market needs during their programs? That seems like the other side of the equation, if you will.
Yeah. Dennis, that's a great question. And I think if I may, Dennis, I'm going to maybe take this opportunity to talk about it even in a broader context and then bring it back around to your specific question. And that is that through my own, in the last year or two, having, again, the pleasure of having conversations with some of the engineering students in some of our GBOV sessions. One of the things I noticed is that there are still quite a few students who think about their careers in a very traditional sense, where they're still focused on kind of one of 3 pathways. Either I'm going to go into academia, or I'm going to be a scientific contributor in some large corporate setting, or maybe I'll go into consulting. It's kind of one of those 3, right? And I really would advise, as a precursor to the answer to your question, Dennis, I really advise people to just take a step back and say, the world as we live in it today is really breaking tradition in so many different ways. There is cross-pollination, not just of technologies, but cross-pollination of technical and business disciplines and financial disciplines and market disciplines. And the solutions to problems take the form of holistic solutions, not technology solutions separated from business, separated from this and that. So very, very important to embrace that level of thinking and break traditional thinking and think about things more from what is your passion and what problems do you want to go out and solve. And by virtue of doing that, Dennis, I think that when one starts to look at it from what are the problems I want to solve, then by default, it starts to expose you to, so many other facets of a problem. And I would encourage you, and we don't have time maybe today to do this, but I have written a couple of blogs about this. In my experiences in the emerging markets, when I was developing the emerging and international market division for a large British company, it was amazing to me how the biggest and most disruptive solutions were not technology oriented. It was trying to understand what was actually happening at the ground, right on the ground, in let's say, for example, India and China, and how healthcare is practiced, and bringing solutions that were holistic in terms of sales models and business models, not just technologies. So anybody can do that. I never had an MBA. I never went through and took a formal finance course, right? And yet I'm in a financial discipline today. So, it's by virtue of looking at things from a holistic perspective, Dennis, that you can start to bring solutions to bear that are in dimensions well outside of just technology.
Any other questions? We're actually, time has, I guess not unsurprisingly, completely flown. And we're in the last minutes of our half-hour slot here. So I want to make sure that if there are any other questions, folks have the chance to ask them. In the absence of that, if the type of career that you've described resonates with students and they'd like to prepare for it, what's we've got like 2 minutes left. What is the one thing you would recommend that they do in their remaining years of their PhD program?
Yeah, no, a great question, Joel, and a good one maybe to circle back around. I would say that to kind of maybe repeat myself a little bit, but then to try to weave it together. Definitely, venture is really as much a people business as it is a tech business. And even if you're not wanting to be in venture per se, in almost every field, you're only as good as the influence that you may have with your work, right? The ability not only to communicate the input into your work, but also the output of your work. But more importantly, how do you engage people? How do you paint a broader vision? How do you inspire them towards that vision? And so what I would recommend, are a couple of things. Number one is, take the time through your graduate education to explore those things in yourself. Don't just stay within the paradigm of the lab setting. Go out and really try to explore what your calling is, and take yourself and immerse yourself in opportunities where you have to stretch yourself into those types of activities, where you have to go and sell something. You have to go and learn something, and you have to go and influence people towards a certain vision. And finally, I would just say again, to come back full circle, it's really important to break traditional paradigm of your career paths. Think more holistically as opposed to predefined channels, because the world in which we're living in doesn't exist in neat molds anymore, and that's to your advantage. So go out there, and I would love to see more entrepreneurs, because some VCs will disagree with me, but I believe that the best way to assess great entrepreneurs is to have been one. So go out there, identify a clear need, get passionate about it, take a nascent technology for which you have a vision to solve that need, develop it into a product that can address that need and scale, and come and see me.
Thank you so much.
That's a wonderful way. Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful way to wrap things up. Thank you so much to both Dr. Adam Sharkawy and Professor Joel Collier for the conversation today. Thank you so much to our audience for your engagement with the conversation. And I hope those of you who are students will take Dr. Sharkawy up on his offer to come and connect with him after you find that place of passion for your own interests. We do look forward to seeing many of you for future events in the Senior Leadership Insights series, which will resume in the fall semester. And for now, we want to bid everyone a very good afternoon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Take care. Cheers.